All right, it's good to see everybody in the first Wednesday of the new year. I hope can't pray enough that 2024 will be a year of peace and calm. Though I'm not too hopeful about it, I can still pray for it. Yeah. And hope everybody had a good winter break. So we are today starting the second book of the Torah, the book of the book that also has the name of the first portion, Shemot. Shemot in Hebrew means names. However, the English name of the book is Exodus, describing the theme that takes up a bulk of the book itself. So, and what I wanted to look at today is to start with chapter 2. So, if in the Eitz Chaim, we're on page 321. In whatever other edition of Chumash you're using, look for Exodus, look for chapter 2, verse 1. So it's near the beginning of the second Aliyah, if that helps you in whatever edition you're using. Again, we're on 321. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So just context before we start reading chapter 2. The context is that the editor of the book of Exodus ensures the transition from the end of last week's portion to the beginning of this week's portion. In that last week, the end of Genesis, we read about the death of Jacob. We read about how he blessed his sons, and then we read about Joseph and his brothers burying Jacob in the ancestral burial plot in Hebron. And then we read about Joseph's death and his promise that he has his brothers make, in that that Joseph will be buried in the land of Israel. The rest of the Bible does carry out that promise, that we'll see in a couple of in several chapters, that when the people start leaving Egypt, that Moses makes a point to gather Joseph's bones and to take the bones with him. And then the book of Joshua records how Joseph's bones were buried in the town of Shechem. Okay, so this Joseph himself serves as kind of a transitional element from one book to the next. So from Genesis to Exodus, from the end of the Torah to the book of Joshua, we have Joseph make an appearance. And then also in settling the land of Israel in the book of Joshua, Joseph is prominent because his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, take on the mantle of tribal settlement. And so essentially, the tribe of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, make up the bulk of northern Israel, and the tribe of Judah makes up the bulk of southern Israel. So for the rest of the Bible, then, what we've been introduced to, especially a couple of weeks ago when Judah speaks passionately to Joseph to beg that Benjamin not be taken hostage, that lays the groundwork for what lies in store in the future for the people of Israel. It's not just a family story; it becomes the story of the people of Israel. And as I've been saying every week, it's unclear which came first. Did the Torah come first, and then the history follows from it? Or did the history come first, and then the Torah written as a result of the history or as a reaction to the history, right? So either way, it's not heretical for me. Well, if Sha'arei Tefillah were an Orthodox synagogue and I was ordained Orthodox, and then I suggested that the Torah was not written by God, that would be a heretical statement and probably a fireable offense on my part. But in non-Orthodox circles, still recognizing the divinity of the Torah, or at least the sanctity of the Torah, it's perfectly acceptable to question and critique in a scientific, academic way what the Torah is, who wrote it, and its place in history. Okay, so the chapter 1 provides us with a new Pharaoh, where he's not named. The Pharaoh of Genesis isn't named. Pharaoh here in Exodus is not named. It's just that it's a new Pharaoh. Joseph is gone, and this Pharaoh decides to enslave the Israelite population because they have grown in great numbers. And also, in chapter 1, Pharaoh makes an edict that all firstborn male Israelites need to be killed by being thrown into the Nile, or at least to be killed. Getting thrown into the Nile is something that happens a little bit later. And then we're told these two Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puah, disobey the edict, and they keep these boys alive. Okay, so that sets the stage for the conflict that is taking place. But people and elements of it, that is, people who are willing to stand up to Pharaoh's cruel and harsh edict, to stand up for good, to stand up for morality, and also how Pharaoh, as a dictator, allows ego to get in the way of proper running of the country. Okay, so a couple of things that already are at stake in chapter 1. Okay, so now that's the background for now what we'll read is the birth of Moses. So chapter 2, page 321. Vayelech ish mi beit Levi, vayikach et bat Levi. So a man from the house of Levi went and took, which means in Torah Hebrew, also could be biblical and rabbinic Hebrew, the taking, the man taking a woman is Hebrew for marriage, what we would call marriage. Okay, so a man from the house of Levi goes and marries a daughter of Levi. Okay, so two people from the tribe of Levi get married. Vatahar ha'isha vateled bain. The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. Vatera oto kitov hu vatitzpenehu shlosha yerachim. So she, the woman, conceives, gives birth to a son, and she sees that he is good. So it says in the English that he was beautiful. So tov, for it to be really beautiful, there should be another word there. We're told in Genesis a couple of times that people are tovat mar'eh, good looking, or have a good appearance. So that, you would say, could be beautiful. Here, she sees that he is good. That's the literal translation. Sees that he is good. All right, there's no commentary on that. We just have to, so if you're just reading the English translation, just understand that the English is making a jump. So she saw that he's good. Now, that could be a number of things. It could mean that he was good looking, or it could mean what a perfect baby in every way. It could mean that. So whatever reason, she sees that he's good. In other words, you could also see, well, and then she hid him for 3 months. Yareach is the moon, but it's also in biblical and rabbinic Hebrew, the moon is also the same word for moon is the word for month, right? Because a month is the time it takes for the moon to orbit the earth. Okay, so the words are interchangeable. So she hid him for 3 months. So why did she hide him? Because he was good. What about him made him worth hiding? So we don't know. We don't know. Now, there's a lot of midrash here, because this is Moses, of course. We know this, that we're not reading this for the first time. So this is Moses. Moses is born, and he's hidden for 3 months. And there's something about him that his mother wants to, because of him, because of it, she wants to save him. And he's good, whatever good means. Now, in the midrash, there's a lot about this, in that almost the stories about the birth of Moses and how he's going to be the future leader of the people of Israel almost is like the stories about the birth of Jesus. Okay, so that in the midrash, there's like the Pharaoh's advisors see in the stars that this special person, this awesome person, was just born. Right? So, in other words, like you think about the stories of the birth of Jesus, the 3 wise men following the stars to Bethlehem to see this beautiful child who was just born. Okay, so the stories about Jesus are very similar to this cryptic story about the birth of Moses. And then also about how special Moses was. Well, let's hold off on that. Okay, we'll get back to how special Moses was in a few sentences. Okay, so the mother, the unnamed mother, sees that her son is good, Tov, and she hides him for 3 months. Remember the edict: firstborn males have to be killed. So she has to hide him for 3 months. Velo yachla od hatzfino. She couldn't hide him any longer. Vatikach lo tevat gomer, vatachmera bachemer uvazafet, vatasem ba et hayeled, vatasem basuf asfat hayaor. She couldn't hide him anymore, so she got for him, or took for him, an ark. I will translate it as ark. It's translated here as wicker basket. So gomer could be wicker, but tevat, the word teva, is clearly a reminder of the teva that Noah was commanded to build. Okay, so in the way back in Genesis, God commands Noah to build this huge ark. And here the same word is used for what the mother is making for her son in order to hide him in it. Okay, so the rabbis do make a connection, and other scholars have made a connection with that ark that Noah builds and this ark or basket that Moses's mother makes. So she makes this ark or basket out of wicker and covers it covers it, well, here it says caulks it with bitumen and pitch. So she makes it waterproof. Okay, she's making it waterproof, and she puts the boy in the basket and puts the basket in the reeds on the bank of the Nile. Okay? Vatetatsav achoto merachok lede'a ma yeaseh lo. And his sister, who we haven't met before, we know it's Miriam, but here, all of a sudden, we know that there's an older child. So there's a sister. The sister stands at a distance to know or to see L'de'ah. So that's an unusual form of it should be lada'at, is to know. L'de'ah. De'ah is the noun form of the verb, knowledge. So to knowledge what would happen to him. Okay, so the Hebrew's awkward. So we get the picture. He's 3 months old. She can't hide him anymore. Why she can't hide him anymore? Is he too big? Is he too active? Is he too noisy? All these things then affect also the description. He's good. So if he can't be hidden anymore, maybe he's not good anymore. It's just a question, just a comment about this. Anyway, she makes this teva and waterproofs it, puts him in the basket, and leaves him in the Nile to be watched over at a distance by his sister. Verse 5, Vatered bat paro lirchotz al hayaor, v'na'aroteha hochot al yad hayaor, vatere et hateva betoch hasuf, vatishlach et amata vatikacheha. So the daughter of Pharaoh went down to bathe in the Nile, or to wash in the Nile, and her servant girls were going alongside in the Nile as well, and she sees. So presumably this is the daughter of Pharaoh, sees the basket amongst the reeds, and she sends her maidservant to get it, to fetch it, as it says here. 6, Vatiftach vatirehu et hayeled, vehine na'ar boche, vatachmol alav, vatomer miyaldei ha'ivrim zeh. She opens the basket, and sees him, and sees the boy, sees him, the boy. So Hebrew again is awkward. It could have just been vatir et hayeled. That would be more correct. And she saw the boy. She saw him, the boy. Okay, and the boy was crying. So Yeled and Na'ar here are interchangeable. Usually they denote different ages of a young boy. So Yeled is usually a young boy. Na'ar is usually an older boy. So it's unclear why the Torah interchanges Yeled and Na'ar. So she sees the boy, and the boy is crying, and she has pity on it. Yes, she takes pity on him, and she says, this is from the Hebrew boys. Now, how does she know that this is a Hebrew boy? Well, perhaps because she knows about her father's edict about Hebrew boys needing to be killed. So perhaps she made the deduction, this must be a Hebrew boy, because why else would a boy be put in a basket to float down the Nile? Or It could be that she saw that he was circumcised. So there's Midrash. If he's 3 months old when he is put into the basket, he must have been circumcised already. And she's inspecting the boy, trying to comfort the boy. Maybe the swaddling falls off, and she notices that he's circumcised. And Egyptian boys aren't circumcised. So perhaps she understands that way that this is a Hebrew boy. Yes, Saul.
Are there any stories or writings about that she couldn't have any children, or she was never married, or anything
All
like
of it in Midrash, all of it, including what her name was. So there's a Hebrew name, Batya, which means daughter of God. And if you know the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, Moses' mother in the movie is Bithia. Bithia would be the English way of saying Batya. So there a lot in the movie The Ten Commandments, and also the cartoon Steven Spielberg movie Prince of Egypt, are based on Midrash, because the details of this story are sparse and Midrash fills it in. So the rabbis claim that the daughter of Pharaoh is Batya. She has some kind of, because she takes pity on the boy, and we'll see in a minute that she hires the boy's real mother to be a nursemaid. There might be something there about her own tendency to be influenced by Israelite religion, or at least the Israelite people. She's more sympathetic to the Hebrew people. They're not Israelites yet. To the Hebrew people than Pharaoh is. And then also just this whole scenario here of what happens is expanded upon in the Midrash. So I mean, I could take down from the shelf here in the library the volume from Legends of the Jews, which was written over 100 years ago. It's a collection of all the Midrashim, kind of written in a more chronological order to follow the Torah. I could pull it down, and there would be pages and pages and pages of stories from these 6 verses so far. Just the story of who this boy is, how special the boy is, what Pharaoh does with this boy once he is brought into the palace by Pharaoh's daughter, what kind of test Pharaoh does, because this is the classic story about how Moses ends up with a lisp or a stutter or some kind of speech impediment. There's a story that in order to test whether this boy that Pharaoh's daughter brings into the palace is the one that the advisors had predicted would be the future leader of the Israelite, of the Hebrew people, and they want to get rid of this boy to alleviate the effect of this prophecy. So they put 2 trays before the boy, one tray of hot coals and one tray of diamonds. So Moses, according to the Midrash, naturally is attracted to the diamonds. And the Midrash says the advisors are saying, if the boy goes to the diamonds, then we know that he is the one who is this future king of Israel. So Moses starts to reach for the diamonds, and an angel miraculously appears, pushes Moses' hand to the hot coals, and Moses burns his hand and puts his hand in his mouth to cool off his fingers. But in process, he burns his tongue, and by burning the tongue, that's how he gets the speech impediment. So that answers a couple of questions that the rabbis have that are missing in the story. How we know later in a couple of chapters that Moses is kivad peh. which literally means heavy-mouthed or speech impediment or something like that. How did he get the speech impediment? So this story answers that question. It also answers the question of what happened in Moses's life until we meet him, which we're going to get to very shortly in the story. Okay, so that's the most famous of all the stories. And also among Pharaoh's advisors is Job. So that answers another question too. The book of Job later in the Bible, who's Job? And because we don't know anything about him before, and the rabbis go off on lots of midrash about Job, when he lived, how old he was, how many generations he lived. So the rabbis say he was from the time of Abraham, and he lived through the time of Pharaoh and the Hebrews in Egypt, and he was an advisor to Pharaoh. So one of the advisors to Pharaoh. So lots of things the rabbis do with this story to kind of connect the dots that we might not normally connect. Okay, somehow Pharaoh's daughter knows that this is a Hebrew boy. Okay, so he's 3 months old at this time, floated down the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter ends up with this boy, and she takes pity on this boy. Okay, so she doesn't fulfill her father's edict. She does the opposite. She takes pity on this boy. 7, Vatomer achoto el bat paro. Ha'elech v'karati lach isha meneket min ha'ivriot v'tenik lach et ha'yeled. So the boy's sister says to the daughter of Pharaoh, now, the reality of this, could this, like, how dare this Hebrew girl speak to the daughter of Pharaoh? We would imagine that that would not be allowed, that she would be detained. Like, how did this non-Egyptian enter into these waters of the Nile where the daughter of Pharaoh is bathing? How could that be? You would imagine there would be some security guards, some eunuchs that are there as part of the palace guards, right? They're often men were castrated in order to serve the harem and other women in the palace. So there wouldn't be anything to that the king or the pharaoh would have to worry about with these eunuchs. And you would imagine that these eunuchs would be there to guard the daughter of Pharaoh and her entourage. But that Moses' sister just approaches the daughter of Pharaoh and talks to her and says, should I go and call for you a nursemaid from among the Hebrews and will to nurse the boy? What a preposterous statement. But again, this is a story. So this is how the editor of the story makes these events all work out. All right. So, but again, realize that if this were a real story with real events, there's no way that Moses' sister would be able to have that access, nor should she have the chutzpah to make such a suggestion to the daughter of Pharaoh. And the daughter of Pharaoh said, why would I want a Hebrew to contaminate this boy who I'm about to adopt? Verse 8, Vatomer la bat paro, lechi, vatelech ha'alma, vatikra et em hayeled. So the daughter of Pharaoh says to her, go, meaning, yes, do what you suggest. And the young girl, so alma would be the Hebrew equivalent of na'ar. So there's maiden. So the maiden went and called the mother of the boy, which happens to be her mother. 9, Vatomer la bat paro, Helichi et hayeled hazeh, vehenikihu li, va'ani etain et secharech, vatikach ha'isha hayeled vatenikehu. So the daughter of Pharaoh said to her, the mother of the boy, go with this boy and nurse him for me, and I will give you your payment, your salary. And the woman took the boy and nursed him. Right? So now we understand from the movie The Ten Commandments that this is how Moses grows up in the Hebrew home for a couple of years and gets some kind of Hebrew background before being weaned and then going into the palace. Verse 10, Vayigdal hayeled, vateviehu levat paro, vayihi la levain, vatikra shemo Moshe, vatomer kimin hamayim meshitihu. So the boy grew up and was brought, and she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh, and he became to her a son, and she called him Moshe, which is an Egyptian name, and she said, because he was pulled or drawn out of the water. So Moshe becomes a Hebrew name connected to the Hebrew root for drawing out of the water. But Moshe is also an Egyptian name. Okay, so, and then I want to start verse 11. Vayehi bayamim ahem, vayigdal Moshe. And in those days, Moses grew up. Now here, this is so aggravating because we don't know how old Moses is now. Verse Vayetze el achav vayar b'sivlotam, and he goes out among his brothers and sees their suffering. Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'achav, and he sees an Egyptian man hitting or beating a Hebrew man from among his brothers. How old is Moses here? Why are the Hebrews called his brothers? How was he raised in the palace by the daughter of Pharaoh, where it says he became her son? So how does he know that they are his brothers? Or does he know that they are his brothers? And is that the narrator saying that they are his brothers? Or does Moses really know that they are his brothers? So, and what kind of contact has Moses had with his Hebrew family, whether it's his own biological family or by extension the greater Hebrew family that is there outside the palace? How much is he aware of that or not? Right? So again, the Midrash, we're left to the Midrash to fill that in for us. We don't know. From here, we have no idea. So the Midrash is how the Ten Commandments movie chooses to convey it in the story, and also how the Prince of Egypt. If you remember the cartoon movie, I think the movie starts with like a chariot race. Moses and his brother Ramses are just racing each other in chariots all around the capital city. Okay, so that's obviously taking liberty with the Midrash. But the Midrash says that Moses is raised like his by his his brother Ramses, and trained to be in the way that all sons of Pharaoh would be raised. So you can imagine, as any kind of medieval kind of account or modern times, how princes are educated in the palace. There's special tutors for them. Not only do they learn academic material, but they also learn how to fight. So they're given the best kind of education for hand-to-hand combat, and also how to conduct a war, so to become a general. So all of these things are, according to the Midrash, what Moses learned. And that, in fact, he became one of the generals in Pharaoh's army and led a battle to down in Ethiopia, according to the Midrash. That's what Moses did. So he's old already. He's already in his 20s or late 20s, according to the Midrash, by the time verse 11 rolls around. Okay. Now, about his Jewish upbringing, so that he's still, according to the Midrash, he maintains a contact with his mother, who we know later to be Yocheved, and his sister and brother and extended family. So he knows Miriam and Aaron and everybody else in his family, according to the Midrash. According to the Torah, it's unclear. All right, so I'm going on and on about this because of how it's similar. Just a second, Saul. It's similar to Abraham, right? We're introduced to Abraham. He's born to Terach, and Abraham's brothers are born to Terach. And then we meet him when he's 75 years old. So the first significant thing that we see about Abraham is when he's 75. What happens in his whole life up to the time he's 75 for God to establish the family of the Jewish people with Abraham and Sarah? Right? So the Midrash has to come along and to provide us with the stories that provide the background for how Abraham became a monotheist in a society of polytheists, right? How does Abraham come to know God in a society that has gods with a small g and idols all around, right? So there are a number of stories. And we also find that Abraham has supernatural abilities, that the king of Babylon wants to destroy Abraham also because the king's advisors say this guy Abraham is a bad guy. You got to get rid of him because he's going to be a arch enemy number one for you. So he throws Abraham into a fiery furnace. And miraculously, Abraham is saved from the furnace and is allowed then to preach and do what he does. So there are a number of liturgical poems that are incorporated into the prayer book, whether the Machzor or the regular prayer book, that refers to the fiery furnace and to Abraham being in the fiery furnace, saying that the story from the Midrash is the story that we need to know about Abraham, and that is what we need to incorporate as part of his personality and part of the story. So even though the Torah leaves it blank for 75 years, the Midrash fills in the blank to the point where we have to traditionally accept the story from the Midrash, just like we accept the story of how Moses got the speech impediment from the angel pushing his hand to the hot coals. Okay, so that story becomes part of the story of Moses. Just like in Christian tradition, and I would say in Muslim tradition too, the stories about Muhammad in the Quran, the stories about Jesus in the Bible and the Christian Bible are to be taken literally. So if you are a person of faith, that traditional faith, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, then you accept not just what is written in the sacred text, but also what's written in the Midrash on that text, whether it's Jewish, Christian, or Muslim Midrash. All of that is part and parcel of the story too. Okay, so even though there are gaps in the story, major gaps, like what happened in Moses' life for 20 some odd years, there aren't gaps because the Midrash fills it in, and traditionally we accept the Midrash story as an explanation of what happened in Moses' life. So Saul, did you have a question for before?
Yeah, I wanted to get back. Why did we know the name of Moses' parents at the beginning? Is that for dramatic effect or what?
Right. So I don't know because in it's not until um, chapter. Just looking ahead. Um, just a second. Um, I don't think it's until next portion that we get a story of the genealogy of Moses. So one answer to your question, why aren't Moses's parents and sister named here, is that we have a different author of the story here in this portion than we do in the portion where his parents, sister, and brother are named. Amram, Yocheved are his parents. Aaron and Miriam are his brother and sister, and even Aaron's wife, Elisheva, is mentioned in that chapter too. So it could be that we have different authors of stories presented here in the beginning of Exodus. Why why this oral tradition that becomes part of this story here doesn't name the daughter of Pharaoh, doesn't name Moses's parents, doesn't name his sister? Don't know. It could just be the literary style of that particular tradition to only name the person that's most important in the story. I don't know. Bob.
I realize I don't want to take you too far off-field, and I realize this is just a story and
Yeah.
leaving out some key facts. But is Aaron supposedly older or younger than Moses?
Aaron and Miriam are older than him.
Okay, so
Aaron
the
is
order to
late.
kill
Go ahead.
the male child happened after Moses was born.
Right.
And if all the male children were supposed to be killed, this is a little bit labor-based, but where did the workforce come from?
Okay, so already the Hebrew population had grown exponentially. So you could answer by saying there's plenty of people to go around, and yes, Pharaoh was short-sighted by saying, "Hey, we gotta nip this in the bud. We can't allow the Hebrews to overtake the population, so we're going to ensure that the numbers stop here." So that was apparently that was his goal, is to stop, to kill the population there and have enough people to work for the time being, and maybe he would get workers from someplace else because he's Pharaoh. It's a mighty empire. They could conquer some other country and enslave that conquered population. So I don't think Pharaoh was worrying about where they're coming from. I think he was more worried about stemming the rapid rise in population. But again, this is all about how seriously we take this story and how historically accurate it is. We only have bits and pieces in supposedly contemporaneous literature about things that Bible scholars have guessed that maybe that reference in archaeological material could be to this time period, but we don't know for sure. Most scholars say that the Moses and the Exodus happened between 1300 1200 BCE. But we don't know. We don't know for sure because there's no evidence of there being an Exodus, no evidence of 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 50 marching through the Sinai Peninsula. You would think that many people would leave some litter behind that would become archaeological artifacts, and nothing has been found in the Sinai. Mount Sinai hasn't been found, and nothing about the story has been proven. The first thing that we can prove to some degree, really the earliest that we can in Jewish history is the time of King David. There could be things like the Battle of Jericho might be proven, but it's not proven beyond a shadow of the doubt. So Jewish history, Israelite history, really archaeologically can be proven from King David. So that's 1000 BCE. Anything before 1000, like Moses, 1300, 300 years before, and certainly the patriarchs and matriarchs, can't be proven. We only have this story. So the story, clearly, the purpose of this story is to provide the religious foundation for who the Jewish people are, not the historical foundation. Okay, the historical foundation is after the fact. The point of the story is religious. Through the story, we might get to some historical fact, but that historical fact doesn't happen until later in the Bible with King David. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about today. Any other questions or comments about this? So we'll stop here for today. A lot of food for thought about Moses and who Moses was, and the origin of the Moses myth and the people of Israel. So to be continued next Wednesday. Have a good rest of the day, everybody, and again, Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you.